The last human prisoner smiled when the Empire announced his execution. The cell was cold, but Ethan Cross had stopped feeling the cold weeks ago. He sat on the metal floor with his back against the wall, his wrists chained together with a thick black band that hummed with a low electric current. The band was not there to hurt him. It was there to stop him from using his hands to make anything. The Skarn Empire had learned the hard way that humans could build weapons out of almost nothing. A piece of wire, a broken cup, a bent spoon. So they took away his hands' freedom, even though his body was weak, and his ribs still ached from the beating he took during his capture. Above him, a small speaker crackled to life. "Prisoner 447, said a flat mechanical voice. "The Grand Inquisitor will see you now." Ethan did not move at first. He looked at the ceiling, at the small red light of the camera that watched him every hour of every day. Then he smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but it was real. The guards outside the cell noticed it on their screens. One of them, a young Skarn soldier named Drell, frowned and leaned closer to the monitor. "Sir," Drell said to the older guard beside him, "he's smiling again." The older guard, a scarred veteran named Korath, did not even look up from his data pad. "They all smile before they break," he said. "Give him a few more weeks." But Korath was wrong. Ethan Cross was not close to breaking. He had been a prisoner of the Skarn Empire for 112 days, and in that time he had learned three things. First, that the Skarn feared humans more than they let anyone know. Second, that fear made people careless. And third, that no cage built by frightened hands could ever be perfect. The cell door slid open with a hiss of air, and two guards in heavy gray armor stepped inside. They grabbed Ethan by the arms and pulled him to his feet. He did not resist. There was no point. His legs were weak from months of poor food and no sunlight, and even if he tried to fight, the guards were 3 times his size. The Skarn were tall, broad-shouldered creatures with gray, scaled skin and eyes that glowed faintly orange in the dark. They looked like something between a lizard and a soldier bred only for war. They marched him down a long gray hallway. The walls were smooth metal, lit by strips of pale blue light. Every few steps they passed another cell, but all of them were empty. Ethan knew why. He was the last one, the last human prisoner in the entire Skarn Empire. Every other human captured during the war had died, escaped, or been executed already. Only he remained, kept alive for reasons the Empire had never fully explained to him. At the end of the hallway was a large, round room. In the center of it stood a single chair, bolted to the floor, with restraints for the arms and legs. Sitting across from the chair, behind a curved black desk, was the Grand Inquisitor of the Skarn Empire, a creature named Zhal Voss Thren. Zhal was old for a Skarn, his scales faded to a pale silver gray, his eyes dimmer than a younger Skarn's would be. But his mind was sharp, sharper than almost anyone else in the Empire. He had spent the last 3 years studying humans, trying to understand why a species so small, so short-lived, so physically weak compared to a Skarn warrior, had managed to hold off the Empire's advance for over a decade before finally falling. The guards pushed Ethan into the chair and locked the restraints around his wrists and ankles. Then they stepped back and stood by the door, weapons ready, just in case. Zhal studied Ethan for a long moment before speaking. "Do you know why you are still alive, human?" "You've asked me that before," Ethan said. His voice was rough from disuse but steady. "You never gave me a real answer." "Because I have been waiting," Zhal said. "Waiting for you to tell me the truth about what happened at Karis Station. Waiting for you to explain how a single human transport ship destroyed 3 of our cruisers before it was finally brought down. Waiting for you to explain the signal your people sent out just before your homeworld's last defense fell." Ethan's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did. A flicker, gone as fast as it came. "I told you," Ethan said. "I don't know anything about a signal." "You are lying," Zhal said calmly. "I have interrogated over 400 prisoners in my career, human. I know the shape of a lie. Yours has edges, sharp ones. You are hiding something, and soon it will not matter because you will be dead, and whatever secret you carry will die with you." For a moment the room was silent, except for the low hum of the lights. "Is that what today is?" Ethan asked. "Another interrogation, or did you finally decide to just kill me?" Zhao leaned back in his chair. On the desk in front of him, a screen lit up, showing a document written in the sharp, angular script of the Skarn language. He turned it so Ethan could see, even though Ethan could not read a word of it. "The Emperor has made his decision," Zhao said. "In 7 days, on the anniversary of the fall of your species' capital world, you will be executed. Publicly. The event will be broadcast to every world in the Empire, and to every allied species watching from beyond our borders. It will be called the ending of man. The final proof that humanity, the species that dared to resist the Skarn Empire for 11 years, is finished. Erased. Gone." He paused, studying Ethan's face for a reaction. Fear, anger, sadness, anything. What he got instead was a smile. A full smile this time, one that reached Ethan's tired eyes and made them shine just slightly in the dim light of the room. Zhao's scales shifted, a sign of unease among the Skarn. "You find this amusing?" "No," Ethan said quietly. "I find it interesting." "Explain." Ethan leaned forward as far as the restraints would allow. "You've spent 3 years trying to figure out why humans fought so hard. Why we didn't just surrender when your fleets first appeared over our colonies. Why a species with no psychic powers, no natural armor, no claws or fangs, managed to make your empire bleed more in 11 years than any other species in 1,000 years of Skarn conquest. You still don't understand it, do you?" Zhao said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. "You think this execution is an ending," Ethan continued. "You think broadcasting my death to the whole galaxy will finally prove that humanity is finished. That's why you're smiling on the inside right now, even though your face doesn't show it. You think you've won." "We have won," Zhao said, his voice sharper now. "Your homeworld burns under our flags. Your colonies are Skarn territory. Your fleets are dust. There is nothing left of your species but you, sitting in that chair about to die." "That's what I find funny," Ethan said. "You're about to broadcast my execution to the entire galaxy, every world, every species, every camera pointed at me at that moment on that day. You're about to give humanity the biggest audience it has ever had." Zhao frowned, his orange eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" But Ethan only smiled wider and said nothing else. That night back in his cell, Ethan lay on the thin metal cot and stared at the ceiling. The camera's red light blinked steadily above him, recording everything as it always did. He knew the guards were watching. He knew Zhao was probably watching too, waiting for him to slip, to say something in his sleep that would reveal the secret he was hiding. But Ethan didn't talk in his sleep. He had trained himself not to, a long time ago, back when he was still a soldier in Earth's Special Operations Command, back before the Skarn Empire had ever heard the word human. He closed his eyes and let his mind drift back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the war, but the beginning of the plan. The real plan. The one that Zhao and his inquisitors had never even come close to guessing. 11 years ago, when the first Skarn scout ships appeared at the edge of the solar system, humanity had been a single-world species, still fighting over borders and old grudges, still divided into more than 100 nations. There had been no galaxy-spanning fleet, no ancient alliance of starfaring species standing behind them. Just Earth alone, staring up at ships built by an empire that had already conquered 11 other worlds. Most people expected humanity to fall within a year. Some of Earth's own leaders expected it too. But Ethan remembered the meetings. The secret ones, held deep underground, where the finest minds of Earth's militaries and its greatest scientists sat around a table and made a decision that would change everything. They knew they could not win a war of ships against the Skarn Empire, not with the technology humanity had in those early years. So they decided not to fight that war at all. Instead, they fought a different one. A slower one. A war of time and patience and secrets. Every battle humanity lost in the following 11 years, every colony that fell, every fleet that was destroyed, was part of something larger. A distraction. A performance, put on for an audience that did not know it was watching a performance at all. Ethan had been there for the final act. He had been captured on purpose, on the very last day of organized human resistance, because someone needed to survive to see this moment through. Someone needed to be the prisoner, who would smile when the Empire announced his execution. Because in 7 days, when every camera in the Scarn Empire turned to watch a lone human die in a coliseum built to celebrate their victory, humanity would finally reveal what it had been building in the shadows for 11 long years. And Zhao Vas Thren, the greatest inquisitor the Scarn Empire had ever produced, had no idea what was coming. Ethan closed his eyes, and, for the first time in 112 days, he slept peacefully. 3 systems away, in the cold dark of deep space, something began to move. It was not a ship, exactly, not in the way the Scarn Empire understood ships. It was larger than any vessel the Empire had ever built, its hull built from a strange, dark material that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. No sensor array in the Empire's territory had ever detected it, because it had spent the last 4 years sitting perfectly still, powered down to almost nothing, hidden behind a dead moon on the edge of a system the Scarn had marked as empty and useless. Inside the vessel, lights began to flicker on, one deck at a time. Systems that had slept for years came awake with a low hum that echoed through empty corridors. On the bridge, a single screen lit up, showing a countdown. 7 days. A voice, calm and quiet, spoke into the silence of the ship. "Wake the fleet." And across the galaxy, in 100 hidden places the Scarn Empire had never thought to look, other lights began to turn on too. The ending of man, as the Empire called it, was about to become something else entirely. Something the history books of 100 species would remember for the next 10,000 years. But for now, in his cold cell, the last human prisoner slept and smiled. 6 days remained until the execution, and the prison station buzzed with a strange kind of energy. Guards who had once walked past Ethan's cell without a glance now stopped to look through the small window in the door. Some of them stared with curiosity, others with hate. A few, though only a few, looked at him with something that might have been respect, though none of them would ever admit it out loud. Word had spread fast. Every soldier on the station knew that in 6 days, the last human alive would die in front of the whole galaxy, and every one of them wanted to see the creature that had cost the Empire so much. Ethan sat quietly through most of it. He ate the flavorless gray mash they gave him 3 times a day. He did the small exercises his body could still manage, push-ups against the wall, slow stretches to keep his muscles from wasting away completely. He waited. It was on the 2nd day of the 6th that a new visitor came to his cell. Not a guard, not the Inquisitor, someone else. She was young, for a Scarn, with scales a deep green instead of the usual gray, and eyes that were more curious than hostile. She wore the uniform of the Imperial Science Division, a dark blue coat with silver markings on the shoulder. She carried a data pad and a small case of medical tools. "I am Dr. Selacour," she said, stepping into the cell after the guards unlocked the door. "I have been assigned to study you before the execution." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Study me how?" "Biological samples, vital signs, brain activity." She set her case down on the small table bolted to the wall. "The Empire wishes to understand human physiology before the last living specimen is gone. It is a matter of scientific record." "A specimen," Ethan repeated. "Right." Sela glanced at him, her orange eyes narrowing slightly. "Does that offend you?" "Not really," Ethan said. "I've been called worse." She worked quietly for a while, attaching small sensors to his arms and neck, watching numbers scroll across her data pad. Ethan let her work without complaint. There was no point in resisting something so small. Besides, he was curious about her too. In 3 years of captivity, he had met interrogators, guards, and soldiers. He had never met a scientist who looked at him with genuine curiosity instead of fear or hatred. "Your heart rate is unusual," Sela said after a while, frowning at her screen. "It should be elevated." "Every prisoner I've studied, of any species, shows increased heart rate and stress hormones when discussing their own death. Yours has barely changed since I walked in. Maybe I'm just tired, Ethan said. Or maybe, Sella said slowly, you are not afraid. Ethan said nothing. Sella sat back on her stool and studied him for a long moment. May I ask you something, off the record? You can ask, I might not answer. Why do humans fight the way they do? She said. I have read the reports, the battle records. Your species had no advanced technology when the war began. Your weapons were primitive compared to ours. Your ships were slower, weaker, and fewer in number. And yet you held out for 11 years. You made us pay for every world we took. Some of our greatest fleets were destroyed by human forces a tenth their size. I do not understand it. None of us do. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. There was something different about the way she asked the question. Not like Zhao, who wanted the answer as a weapon, a piece of intelligence to use against some hidden human resistance. She asked like someone who genuinely wanted to understand. You want the real answer, Ethan said. Yes. Humans have always known how to lose, Ethan said. We've been losing wars against ourselves for our entire history. Losing to disease, to famine, to disasters we couldn't control. We learned a long time ago that losing doesn't mean giving up. It means you adapt, you learn, and you come back stronger. Every fleet you destroyed taught us something. Every colony you took forced us to build better defenses on the next one. You were fighting an enemy that had 11 years of the best minds in an entire species learning how to beat you, one battle at a time. Sella was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. But you still lost. Your homeworld fell, your fleets are gone. In 6 days, the last of your species will die in the Imperial Colosseum. Ethan's smile returned, small and steady. Is that really what you believe is happening? Sella frowned. What do you mean? Nothing, Ethan said. Forget I said anything. But she did not forget. Long after she left his cell that day, packing up her instruments and heading back to her lab to record her findings, Sella Core found herself thinking about the strange calm in the human prisoner's eyes. It did not fit any of her models. It did not match any of the data she had gathered on fear, on stress, on the biology of dying creatures across a dozen species she had studied in her career. Humans, she was beginning to realize, did not fit any of the models the Empire had built for them at all. On the 4th day, Zhao Vas Thren came to see Ethan again. This time, the old Inquisitor did not bring guards to strap Ethan to a chair. He came alone, standing outside the cell door, looking in through the small window with his dim orange eyes. You have refused every offer I have made you, Zhao said. Confess what you know about the signal from Kara's station, and I can promise you a quick death. Refuse, and the execution will be slow, painful, broadcast in full detail so every world in the Empire understands exactly what happens to those who resist us. You've made that offer 3 times now, Ethan said, not bothering to get up from his cot. The answer is still no. Why? Zhao asked, and for the first time there was something almost like genuine confusion in his voice. You are going to die either way. Why choose the painful path when a peaceful one is available to you? Ethan sat up slowly and looked at the old Inquisitor through the window. Because you still think this is about me, he said. You still think if you can just find the right threat, the right offer, I'll break and tell you some secret that saves the Empire from whatever is coming. But it was never about me, Zhao. It stopped being about me the moment I let myself get captured. Zhao's scales shifted again, that same sign of unease Ethan had seen in the interrogation room. You let yourself get captured. I've said too much, Ethan said, lying back down on the cot. Go finish planning your celebration. You've only got 4 days left. Zhao stood at the door for a long moment, staring at the human who showed no fear, no anger, nothing but calm patience, as though he were waiting for a bus rather than his own execution. Something about it bothered the old Inquisitor deeply, in a way he could not quite explain even to himself. In 3 years of interrogating this human, he had never once caught him in a lie that mattered. Every small thing Ethan admitted to had checked out. Every denial had held firm under every method the Empire had used. And now, 4 days before his death, the prisoner was talking about letting himself get captured, about the execution not being about him at all. Zhao turned and walked away from the cell, his mind working faster than it had in years. He needed to speak with Fleet Command. He needed to check the defense grids around every major Skarn world just to be safe. He told himself it was only caution. Only the habit of a lifetime spent hunting for threats before they could strike. But deep down, in a place he did not like to examine too closely, Zhao Vas Thren was afraid. That night Sela Kor sat alone in her lab reviewing the data she had collected from Ethan Cross for what felt like the 100th time. Heart rate, brain activity, hormone levels, all of it pointed to the same strange conclusion. The human was not afraid of dying, not even a little. She pulled up an old file, something she had found buried deep in the Imperial archives while researching human biology months ago. It was a fragment of a human text, translated by an old protocol droid decades ago during the First Contact era, before the war had even begun. Most of it was corrupted or lost, but one line remained intact, and Sela found herself reading it again and again. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. She did not fully understand the words. Human poetry was strange, layered with meanings that did not translate cleanly into the Skarn language. But something about it made the hair on her arms stand up, the closest thing her scaled skin had to the reaction. She thought about the calm smile on Ethan Cross's face, the steady heartbeat, the words he had said, almost a warning, though he had stopped himself before saying too much. It was never about me. Sela closed the file and sat back in her chair, staring at the ceiling of her small lab. Outside, through the narrow window, she could see the stars, thousands of them, spread out across the black canvas of space. Somewhere out there, in the dark between them, was whatever the human prisoner believed was coming. For the first time since she had joined the Imperial Science Division, Dr. Sela Kor found herself wondering if the Empire had made a terrible mistake. Far beyond the edges of Skarn territory, in the silent dark where no Imperial sensor had ever reached, the great dark ship continued its slow awakening. Deck by deck, system by system, it came back to life, joined now by smaller vessels emerging from their own hiding places across a dozen different systems. They moved without lights, without transmissions, gathering in the black spaces between the stars like a storm building on the horizon of a world that did not yet know it was about to rain. On the bridge of the great dark ship, a woman in a worn gray uniform studied a star chart that marked the location of the Skarn homeworld, and the Imperial Colosseum built at its heart, where in 4 days' time, the galaxy would gather to watch the Empire declare its final victory over humanity. She did not smile the way Ethan had. Her face was hard, carved from years of loss and grief, and the terrible patience it had taken to wait this long. But in her eyes was the same quiet certainty that had kept Ethan calm through 3 years of captivity. "Fleet status," she said. A voice answered from the darkness of the bridge. "All vessels report ready, Admiral Reyes, awaiting your order." Admiral Elena Reyes looked at the star chart a moment longer, at the small glowing dot that marked the Colosseum where her friend, her fellow soldier, the man who had volunteered to be captured so that this moment could finally arrive, was waiting to die. "Not yet," she said quietly. "Let them have their celebration first. Let the whole galaxy watch. Then we show them exactly what they should have been afraid of all along." The bridge crew said nothing, but a quiet, grim energy settled over the ship, the same energy that was spreading now across every hidden fleet, every sleeper cell, every human who had spent 11 long years waiting for this moment. 4 days remained. And far away in his cold cell, Ethan Cross closed his eyes and dreamed of home. 3 days before the execution, the Imperial Colosseum on the Skarn homeworld began to fill with life. It was the largest structure ever built by the Skarn Empire, a massive open bowl of dark metal and stone that could hold nearly 2 million spectators in its stands, with room for millions more to watch through cameras placed at every angle. It had been built 500 years ago to celebrate the Empire's first great conquest, and since then it had hosted the execution of every enemy the Empire had ever defeated. Kings of fallen worlds, generals of broken armies, leaders of rebellions crushed before they could grow. Now it would host the end of humanity. Workers scrambled across the Colosseum floor, setting up the execution platform at its center, a raised circle of black stone with restraints built into a single post. Above it, hundreds of camera drones hovered in careful formation, ready to capture every angle of the event for the broadcast that would reach every world in the Empire and every allied species beyond its borders. In the control tower overlooking the Colosseum, Zhao Vas Thren stood watching the preparations with a heavy feeling in his chest that he could not shake. "Something troubles you, Inquisitor," said a voice behind him. Zhao turned to see Grand Admiral Korth Vesaris, commander of the Imperial fleet, standing in the doorway. Korth was a massive Skarn, even by the standards of his species, with scars across his face from battles fought decades ago. He had led the final assault on Earth itself, the battle that had ended the war and brought humanity to its knees. "The prisoner troubles me," Zhao admitted. "He shows no fear." Korth laughed, a deep rumbling sound. "Of course he shows no fear. He has spent 3 years in a cell alone with nothing left to lose. What does a dead species have to be afraid of?" "That is what concerns me," Zhao said. "He does not act like a creature with nothing to lose. He acts like a creature who knows something we do not." Korth's laughter faded, replaced by a thoughtful frown. "You think the humans are planning something." Admiral Reyes and her fleet were never found after the fall of Earth. Command believed she died in the final battle, along with the last of humanity's forces. "Believed," Zhao repeated. "We never found her body. We never found the wreckage of her ship. We assumed she died because it was convenient to assume it, because the war was over and no one wanted to keep looking for ghosts." Korth was quiet for a moment, considering this. Then he shook his head, his confidence returning. "Even if Reyes survived, Inquisitor, what fleet could she possibly command? We destroyed every shipyard on every human world. We tracked down and eliminated every remaining warship in the months after Earth fell. There is nothing left for her to fight with. A handful of stolen freighters cannot challenge the Imperial fleet." "Perhaps," Zhao said. But he did not sound convinced, and long after Korth left to oversee the final preparations for the execution, the old Inquisitor stood at the window of the control tower, staring out at the darkening sky, and wondered what he was missing. 2 days before the execution, Selachor requested one final meeting with the prisoner. Zhao granted it, more out of curiosity about what the young scientist might learn than any real scientific necessity. She found Ethan sitting cross-legged on the floor of his cell, his eyes closed, breathing slowly and evenly. He opened his eyes when she entered but did not move otherwise. "Meditating?" she asked, setting her case down. "Something like that," Ethan said. "It's a good way to stay calm." "You will need it," Sela said. "The Colosseum is nearly ready. 2 million spectators are expected to attend in person. Billions more will watch across the Empire and its allied territories. It will be the largest broadcast in Imperial history." "Sounds like quite a show," Ethan said. Sela studied his face carefully. "You keep speaking as though this event means something different than what everyone believes it means. What are you hiding, Ethan Cross?" It was the first time she had used his name instead of calling him the prisoner or the specimen. Something in the way she said it made Ethan look at her more closely. "You've been thinking about this a lot," he said. "I cannot stop thinking about it," Sela admitted, sitting down on the small stool across from him. "Your biology does not match your behavior. Every model I have built says you should be afraid. Every piece of data says otherwise. I do not understand it, and I do not like things I do not understand." Ethan considered her for a long moment. Then slowly he spoke. "Can I ask you something, Doctor, off the record like you asked me before?" "Yes." "Do you actually believe the Empire is right to do this? Not politically. Not according to your training. I mean really, personally, do you believe it's right to broadcast the death of the last member of a species to the whole galaxy as entertainment?" Sela hesitated. It was not a question she had ever let herself consider seriously before. She had grown up in the Empire, trained in its academies, taught from childhood that the Skarn were destined to lead, to conquer, to bring order to a chaotic galaxy. Questioning that had never been part of her education. But she had spent the last week studying a creature who showed no fear of death, who spoke with quiet confidence about events that had not yet happened, and something in her carefully built worldview had begun to crack. "I do not know," she said finally, and it was the most honest thing she had said in years. Ethan nodded slowly. "That's a start," he said. "Listen to me, Sela. In 2 days something is going to happen, something big. When it does, you're going to have a choice to make. I can't tell you what to choose. But I want you to remember this conversation when the moment comes." "What is going to happen?" Sela asked, leaning forward. But Ethan only shook his head. "I've already said more than I should. Just remember what I told you." She left the cell that day with more questions than she had come in with. And for the first time in her career, Sela Kor found herself dreading the day of the execution instead of anticipating it. One day before the execution, the Colosseum was fully prepared. Flags bearing the Skarn Empire's crest hung from every wall. Camera drones had been tested and retested. Security forces, numbering in the thousands, patrolled every entrance, every corridor, every rooftop within a mile of the great structure. Emperor Vas Threl himself arrived that evening, descending from his personal shuttle in a procession of guards and advisors. He was an old Skarn, older even than Zhao, his scales a deep, almost black shade of gray that marked him as one of the oldest living members of his species. He had ruled the Empire for over 100 years, had overseen the conquest of a dozen worlds, and considered the defeat of humanity to be the crowning achievement of his long reign. He met with Zhao privately that night, in a quiet chamber overlooking the Colosseum. "Tell me, Inquisitor," the Emperor said, his voice deep and slow with age, "is everything in order?" "Everything is prepared, Your Majesty," Zhao said, bowing his head slightly. "The prisoner will be executed exactly as planned, broadcast to the entire Empire and beyond." "Good," the Emperor said. Then he paused, studying Zhao's face with the same sharp attention that had kept him alive and in power for over a century. "But you are troubled." Zhao hesitated. He had served 3 emperors in his long career, and he had learned long ago that lying to any of them was a dangerous game. "The prisoner does not fear his death, Your Majesty. He speaks as though he knows something we do not. I fear we may be walking into a trap of some kind." The Emperor considered this for a long moment. What kind of trap could a single, unarmed prisoner possibly set from inside a maximum security cell? "I do not know," Zhao admitted. "That is what troubles me most." The Emperor was quiet for a while, looking out the window at the massive Colosseum below, its lights blazing against the darkening sky. "Increase security," he said finally. "Double the fleet presence in orbit. If there is any threat, however small, however unlikely, I want us prepared for it. But the execution will proceed as planned. The galaxy is waiting to see the end of humanity, and I will not give them any reason to doubt our strength by delaying." "Yes, Your Majesty," Zhao said. That night, orders went out across the Skarn fleet. Additional warships were called in from nearby systems to reinforce the defense grid around the homeworld. Extra security forces were deployed throughout the Colosseum and the capital city surrounding it. By morning, the Skarn homeworld would be more heavily defended than it had ever been in its 500-year history. It would not be enough. That same night in his cell, Ethan Cross received one final visitor. It was not Zhao, or Sela, or any guard he recognized. It was a maintenance worker, an older Skarn with tired eyes and worn hands, who came to check the wiring in the cell's lighting system, a routine task that had been scheduled weeks in advance and drew no special attention from anyone. The worker knelt by the wall panel near Ethan's cot, opening it to check the wires inside. As he worked, he spoke quietly, so quietly that the camera's audio sensors could not pick up his words over the hum of the station. 12 hours, the worker said, not looking up from his work. "Fleet is in position. Signal will go out the moment you're on the platform." Ethan's heart, which had remained steady through 3 years of captivity, and every threat the Empire had made against him, finally quickened just slightly. "You're one of ours," Ethan said quietly, barely a whisper. The old Scarn worker's eyes flicked up to meet his for just a moment, and something in them, a shared understanding, a shared purpose, passed between them. "Not everyone in this empire believes in this war," the worker said. "Some of us have been waiting a long time to help end it." He closed the wall panel and stood, gathering his tools. 12 hours, he repeated. "Be ready." Then he was gone, walking calmly out of the cell as though he had done nothing more than routine maintenance work, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and a new, sharper edge to the calm he had carried for so long. Tomorrow, the galaxy would gather to watch the end of humanity. Instead, they would witness its beginning. The day of the execution arrived with a sky so clear over the Scarn homeworld that the Imperial weather stations later called it perfect, ideal conditions for the largest broadcast in the Empire's history. By dawn, the Colosseum was already filling with spectators, Scarn citizens dressed in their finest clothing, eager to witness history. Diplomats from a dozen allied species sat in reserved boxes near the Emperor's platform, sent by their governments to witness the Empire's final proof of dominance. Camera drones hovered in careful patterns above the arena, ready to capture every second for the billions who would watch from their homes across the Empire's territory. In orbit above the homeworld, the Imperial fleet held its position, more ships gathered in defense of a single world than had ever assembled in one place before. Grand Admiral Korth Vesaris stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the sensor readouts with the calm confidence of a man who believed, truly believed, that nothing could threaten this day. In his cell, Ethan Cross was woken early by two guards who said nothing as they unlocked his restraints and led him toward the transport that would carry him to the Colosseum. He did not resist. His heart beat steady and calm, the same rhythm it had held for 3 years, though now there was a quiet current of anticipation running beneath it, like the stillness of the air before a storm breaks. They dressed him in a simple gray prisoner's uniform, plain and unmarked, meant to strip away any last shred of identity or dignity before he stood before the galaxy. Ethan let them do it without complaint. Clothing did not matter. What mattered was the number he kept counting quietly in his head, the hours ticking down toward the moment the old maintenance worker had promised him. The transport carried him through the streets of the Scarn capital city, streets lined with citizens who had come out to watch the prisoner pass by on his way to the Colosseum. Some threw things at the transport's reinforced windows. Others simply stared in cold silence. A few, though very few, looked away entirely, unable to watch. Ethan looked out at all of it calmly, memorizing the faces, the buildings, the flags hanging from every window. This was the heart of the empire that had burned his homeworld. In a few hours, it would look very different. Dr. Selacor sat in the Imperial Science Division's reserved section of the Colosseum, high above the execution platform, with a clear view of everything below. She had not slept the night before, her mind racing with the conversation she'd had with Ethan 2 days earlier. "Just remember what I told you." She did not know what she was supposed to remember exactly, or what choice she would be asked to make. But she found herself watching the arena below with a growing sense of dread that had nothing to do with sympathy for a single doomed prisoner, and everything to do with a feeling she could not name. A feeling that something enormous was about to happen, and that she was standing far too close to it. Beside her, other scientists from the division chatted excitedly about the historic nature of the day, some placing bets on how long the human would survive under the various methods of execution that had been prepared for the ceremony. Sella said nothing, watching the platform below with a knot in her stomach that grew tighter with every passing minute. At the appointed hour, trumpets sounded across the Colosseum, and the crowd's noise swelled into a roar as Emperor Voss Threll emerged onto his platform, high above the arena floor, flanked by his personal guard and the highest officials of the Empire. Zhao Voss Thren stood near the Emperor's side, his orange eyes scanning the crowd below with the restless energy of a man who could not shake his unease. Even now, even with the entire Imperial fleet standing guard in the skies above. The transport carrying Ethan arrived at the edge of the arena floor, and the guards led him out into the open space, toward the black stone platform at the center of the Colosseum. The crowd's roar grew louder as he came into view, a small, thin figure surrounded by armored guards twice his size, walking calmly toward the post where he would be bound. Ethan looked up as he walked, taking in the massive scale of the Colosseum, the endless rows of spectators stretching up and away in every direction, the hundreds of camera drones hovering above like a swarm of watching eyes. Somewhere out there, he knew, billions more were watching through screens across 100 worlds. Good, he thought, watch closely. The guards bound his wrists to the post at the center of the platform. A single Skarn official stepped forward, holding a data pad with the official proclamation of his crimes and his sentence, ready to read it aloud for the recording that would be broadcast alongside the execution itself. "Ethan Cross," the official began, his voice amplified across the entire Colosseum. "You stand condemned as the last remaining combatant of the human resistance against the lawful authority of the Skarn Empire. Your species waged war against this empire for 11 years, causing immeasurable loss and destruction. For these crimes, you are sentenced to death here, before the eyes of the galaxy, as final proof of the Empire's victory and the end of humanity's resistance." The crowd roared its approval. Ethan stood silently through it, his eyes finding Zhal's on the Emperor's platform far above. The old Inquisitor was watching him closely, his scales shifting with that same unease Ethan had seen so many times over the past week. "Do you have any final words, human?" the official asked, turning toward Ethan with what might have been curiosity beneath his formal tone. Ethan looked out at the crowd, at the Emperor high above, at Zhal standing tense and watchful beside him, at the countless cameras capturing every second of this moment for a galaxy of viewers. He smiled. "Just one thing," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the amplification system built into the platform. "Check your sensors." For a moment, nothing happened. The official frowned, confused by the strange response. In the Emperor's platform above, Zhal's blood ran cold, and he immediately turned to the nearest guard, snapping out an order to contact Fleet Command. Then across the Colosseum, across the capital city, across the entire homeworld, alarms began to sound. In orbit, Grand Admiral Korth Vesaris felt his ship lurch beneath him as every sensor array across the fleet lit up at once, screaming warnings that made no sense. Dozens of massive contacts had appeared out of nowhere, at the very edge of detection range, closing fast on the homeworld's position. "Report," Korth barked, gripping the edge of his command chair. "Sir, we're reading 60 vessels emerging from cloak across multiple vectors," his sensor officer called out, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Signatures don't match anything in our database. They're human, sir. They have to be human." "That's impossible," Korth snapped. "We destroyed every human shipyard 11 years ago. Where did they build 60 warships?" But even as he said it, the terrible truth was beginning to dawn on him. They had not built 60 warships in 11 years. They had built them before the war ever began, hidden them away in the dark places between the stars, and waited, patiently, silently, for this exact moment. "All ships red alert," Korth roared. "Bring the fleet about, intercept those contacts before they reach orbital range. I want every gun in this system pointed at those ships in the next 2 minutes." But even as his officers scrambled to comply, Korth Vesaris felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The same unease that had haunted Zhal Voss Thren for the past week finally reaching him too, far too late to do anything about it. In the Colosseum, panic began to spread through the crowd as the alarms continued to blare and Imperial officials rushed across the Emperor's platform, shouting orders and demanding information that no one seemed able to provide clearly. Zhal grabbed the nearest officer by the arm. "What is happening?" he demanded. "Unknown contacts approaching the system, sir. Fleet Command reports at least 60 vessels, possibly more, emerging from cloaked positions throughout the outer system." Zhao's eyes snapped down to the execution platform, where Ethan Cross stood bound to the post, still smiling, watching the chaos unfold around him with the calm satisfaction of a man watching a plan he had waited years to see finally come to fruition. "Get the Emperor to safety," Zhao ordered, though even as he said it, he knew it might already be too late for such simple solutions. And someone silence that broadcast now, before the entire galaxy watches us fall apart on live camera. But it was already too late. The cameras, still recording, still transmitting, had caught every second of the chaos. The alarms, the panic, the sudden and complete collapse of the Empire's carefully planned celebration. Across 100 worlds, billions of viewers who had tuned in to watch the end of humanity were instead watching something no one had ever expected to see. The beginning of the Empire's downfall, broadcast live, for all the galaxy to witness. Selacour stood frozen in her seat as the Colosseum descended into chaos around her, her eyes fixed on the small figure still bound to the platform far below. Through the noise and panic, she could see him clearly, could see the calm smile that had not wavered even as an entire empire scrambled in fear around him. "Just remember what I told you." She understood now, finally, what Ethan had meant. This was the moment, the choice. And as she watched the sky above the Colosseum begin to shimmer with the telltale distortion of ships dropping out of high-speed transit, dozens of them, then hundreds, converging on the Skarn homeworld from every direction, Selacour made her decision. She reached into her coat, pulled out the small data drive she had carried with her for 3 years, filled with everything she had learned about human biology, human resilience, human strength, and she began recording, capturing everything happening around her, everything the Empire would want to hide once the dust settled. Because whatever was coming, whatever the humans had built in the shadows for 11 long years, Selacour intended to be there to witness it honestly, not as an imperial scientist studying a doomed species, but as someone finally willing to see the truth for what it was. High above the Colosseum, the sky continued to shimmer and tear, as the first of humanity's hidden fleet began its descent toward the world that had once believed the war was over. The sky over the Skarn homeworld tore open like fabric ripped by an invisible hand, and through the tear came the ships humanity had spent 11 years building in secret. They were unlike anything the Skarn Empire had ever faced. Sleek, dark hulls built from a material that absorbed sensor pulses instead of reflecting them. Weapons systems designed specifically to counter every defense the Empire had developed during the long years of war. Admiral Elena Reyes had spent over a decade preparing for this single moment, gathering the finest engineers and scientists humanity had left after the fall of Earth, hiding them in secret shipyards built into hollowed-out asteroids and abandoned moons across a dozen systems. The Skarn Empire had long ago written off as worthless. Now, 60 warships dropped out of transit above the Skarn capital, their weapons already charging, their targeting systems locking onto the panicked Imperial fleet still scrambling to form a defensive line. On the bridge of her flagship, the resolute Admiral Reyes watched the tactical display with a grim, focused expression. "All ships begin attack pattern Delta," she ordered. "Target their command vessels first. We are not here to destroy this world. We are here to end this war." The first volley of human weapons fire lit up the sky above the Colosseum, striking the nearest Imperial cruisers before their crews had even finished raising shields. Explosions bloomed silently in the vacuum of space, visible from the ground as brief flashes of light against the darkening sky. In the Colosseum below, the crowd's panic turned to screaming terror as the reality of what was happening became impossible to deny. This was not a malfunction, not a false alarm. This was an invasion, unfolding in real time, broadcast to every camera in the arena and streamed live to a galaxy of stunned viewers. Zhao Vas Thren stood on the Emperor's platform, frozen for just a moment by the sheer impossibility of what he was witnessing, before decades of training took over and he began barking orders, pulling the Emperor toward the evacuation shuttles hidden beneath the platform. "Your Majesty, we must go now." But Emperor Vas Threl, old as he was, planted his feet and refused to move, his eyes fixed on the execution platform below, where Ethan Cross still stood bound to the post, watching the chaos with calm, patient eyes. He knew, the Emperor said quietly, understanding finally dawning in his ancient voice. He knew this was coming. This was never an execution, it was bait. "Your Majesty, please," Zhao urged. "We do not have time for this." The Emperor allowed himself to be pulled toward the shuttle at last, but as he moved, he called out one final order to Zhao. "The prisoner. Do not let him escape. If nothing else survives this day, I want that human dead before this battle ends." Zhao hesitated only a moment before nodding and turning toward the chaos of the arena floor, drawing his sidearm as he moved. He had spent 3 years studying Ethan Cross, 3 years trying to understand the calm at the center of a species the Empire had underestimated so badly. Now, with the Empire's fleet burning in the sky above and the Colosseum descending into panic around him, Zhao Vas Thren made his way toward the execution platform, determined to finish what the Empire had started. Ethan saw the old Inquisitor approaching through the chaos, weapon drawn, moving with the grim determination of a soldier who had nothing left to lose. He pulled against his restraints, but the black bindings held firm, designed to resist far more strength than his weakened body could produce. "You knew," Zhao said, stopping a few feet from the platform, his weapon raised and steady despite the chaos exploding across the sky above them. "This entire time, you knew this was coming." "I told you," Ethan said, his voice calm even with a weapon pointed at his chest. "It was never about me." 11 years of planning, Zhao said, understanding washing over him even as fury built in his chest. 11 years of losing battles on purpose, sacrificing worlds, sacrificing lives, all to buy time to build this. To bring us here to this exact moment, believing we had won, believing your species was finished. "You wanted to believe it," Ethan said. "That's what made it work. You wanted so badly to believe humanity was small and weak, and beatable that you never once considered we might be patient enough to let you believe it, right up until the moment it stopped mattering." Zhao's finger tightened on the trigger, his whole body trembling with 3 years of frustration, 3 years of feeling like he was always one step behind a mystery he could never fully solve. "The Emperor ordered your death. Whatever happens today, whatever your fleet manages to accomplish, I will see that order carried out." "Zhao," a new voice called out, cutting through the chaos. The old Inquisitor turned to see Selachor running across the arena floor toward them, her data pad clutched in one hand, her science division coat flapping behind her. "Stop. Think about what you're doing." "Stay back, Doctor," Zhao warned, not lowering his weapon. "He's unarmed and bound to a post," Sela said, skidding to a stop a short distance away, breathing hard. "What does killing him accomplish now? The fleet is already here. The battle is already happening. Killing him changes nothing except making you a murderer instead of a soldier." "He is the enemy," Zhao said, though his voice wavered slightly, uncertainty creeping back into the sharp edges of his conviction. "He deceived us. He let us believe we had won a war we had actually lost from the very beginning." "He let you believe what you wanted to believe," Sela said. "That's not deception, Zhao, that's just patience. The kind of patience the Empire has never had to develop, because we've never had to be the weaker side in a fight." Above them, the battle raged on, more human ships descending into the atmosphere, engaging the last scattered remnants of the Imperial fleet's orbital defense. The sound of distant explosions rolled across the Colosseum like thunder, and the crowd, most of them now fleeing in every direction, added their screams to the growing chaos. Zhao stood frozen between the weapon in his hand and the human bound helplessly before him, caught in a moment of decision that would define the rest of his long life. "Please," Sela said quietly. "Enough people are going to die today because of a war neither side truly wanted. Don't add to it for nothing." Slowly, the old Inquisitor lowered his weapon. By the time the sun set over the Skarn capital, the battle in orbit had ended, not with the complete destruction of the Imperial fleet, but with its surrender. Admiral Reyes had not come to annihilate the Empire, only to force it to finally listen. With the Imperial command structure in chaos and the Emperor himself forced into hiding, the remaining Skarn military leadership had little choice but to accept the terms humanity's fleet offered: an immediate ceasefire, the release of any remaining human prisoners of war, and the beginning of formal negotiations for a lasting peace between the two species. It was not the ending anyone in the Empire had expected. It was not the ending Ethan Cross had expected either, if he was being honest with himself. He had spent 3 years preparing to die in that Colosseum, ready to accept that outcome if it meant his death could serve as the trigger for the plan Admiral Reyes and the last free humans in the galaxy had spent 11 years building. Instead, as the guards finally released him from the platform, his wrists raw and aching from the restraints, he found himself alive, standing in the ruins of the ceremony meant to celebrate his execution, watching Skarn officials scramble to understand a war that had just changed shape entirely beneath them. Sela Kor stood beside him as the chaos slowly settled into something more organized. Human soldiers now moving carefully through the Colosseum to secure the area and begin the process of establishing contact with Imperial officials. "You knew this would happen," she said, "all of it down to the smallest detail." "Not all of it," Ethan admitted, rubbing his sore wrists. "I didn't know if I'd survive today. I made my peace with that a long time ago." "Why?" Sela asked. "Why risk everything on a plan that depended on us broadcasting your death to the whole galaxy? What if the Empire had simply executed you quietly, without the ceremony?" Ethan looked at her, and for the first time since she had met him, his calm expression softened into something more genuine, more human. "Because your Empire has always needed an audience," he said. "Every conquest, every execution, every show of strength, it was always about proving something to someone. We knew you'd want the whole galaxy watching when you thought you finally beat us. We just needed to make sure that when the moment came, the whole galaxy would be watching something very different instead." Sela considered this for a long moment, looking around at the wreckage of the Colosseum, at the human soldiers moving through the crowd, at the beginnings of a peace neither species had truly believed was possible just hours before. "What happens now?" she asked. Ethan looked up at the sky, where the last traces of the battle were fading into the quiet dark of night, human and Skarn ships now holding an uneasy but real ceasefire in the space above. "Now," he said, "we find out if two species that spent 11 years trying to destroy each other can figure out how to share a galaxy instead." In the months that followed, the peace was fragile, built slowly through careful negotiation between an empire forced to reckon with its own overconfidence, and a human civilization finally emerging from the shadows it had spent over a decade hiding within. Not everyone welcomed the change. Some in the Empire never forgave humanity for the deception that had ended the war on humanity's terms rather than the Empire's. Some humans never forgave the Skarn for the worlds burned, the lives lost, the 11 years of suffering the war had cost. But slowly, carefully, something new began to grow between the two species, built not on conquest or fear, but on the strange respect that comes only from facing an enemy who proves themselves far more than what you believed them to be. Ethan Cross never returned to active military service. He had given enough of himself to the war, 3 years of captivity, the calm acceptance of a death that never came, and when the peace talks finally concluded, he chose instead to help rebuild what remained of humanity's shattered worlds, working alongside old comrades and new Skarn allies alike. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would think back to that cell, to the calm certainty he had carried through months of isolation and threat, to the moment he had smiled when the Empire announced his execution. He had known, even then, that it was never really an ending. It had only ever been the beginning of something no one, not even the Empire that thought it had already won, could have possibly seen coming. And somewhere across the galaxy, on 100 worlds that had once feared the name of humanity only as a memory of a defeated enemy, people were beginning to learn a new lesson instead. That the quietest, calmest smile in the room often belongs to the one who already knows exactly how the story ends.